Welcome back to the Price of Business. I am your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Got Frank Granett here. Today, why should business be concerned about what's happening in the ADHD world, the ADHD phenomenon, and it seems like we live in a culture of diagnosis, culture that really wants to label people and treat people, and they talk a lot about illegal drugs, but the real serious money seems to be in the legal drug variety. And Frank Granett, he is a regular contributor both on the Price of Business and USDailyReview.com. He's with CAOOY.org. We're doing an ongoing series of great audio and articles on this topic. Plus, we've got more in the works, more plans in the works. And Frank is always delighted to have you on the program.
Yeah, great to be on again, Kevin. And, our organization, along with many others across the country, we're going after these risk factors, and we're talking about nutritional, physiological, as well as the environmental risk factors are actually precipitating the onset, especially of these ADHD-like symptoms in children as well as adults. And today we have a great guest with us. He is the clinical director of Alternative Brain Institute in Beverly Hills, California. He received his PhD degree at the UCLA in California. And today's topic, Kevin, we're going after brain devices and toys for children as well as adults to help them get back on track. And, these types of activities that the Alternative Brain Institute utilizes, including virtual games as well as neurofeedback, helps parents and educators as well as business people to rule out the underlying cause before we go to premature drug therapy. And today we have Dr. Adi Jaffe. Dr. Jaffe, welcome to our program.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're glad to have you on the program. Kind of give us a scope of all the areas of the brain that you address. I love the name of your organization, by the way, though. It's kind of clever and I think resonates with people. But tell us a little bit about the various ways you're helping people. What areas are you addressing?
Sure. So, we're here to talk about ADHD, and attention is without a doubt one of the main complaints that people come to us with. But there are also, things like stress, anxiety, sleep issues. Those are probably the most common complaints that people come to us with. And exactly as was just mentioned, what they're trying to see is if they can find a way to intervene without having to rely on medications, because a lot of times they know that, once you start taking these medications, it's pretty hard to stop taking them.
Okay. It looks like you, I'm going to let Frank ask the next two questions, but just as a follow-up to that, are you dealing also with things like OCD and addiction?
We do. So Alternative started out actually as an addiction treatment center, and we were using neurofeedback with many of our clients. And they, Dr. Hill, who's our neurocognitive director, has had experience with everything from Asperger's, autism, ADHD, and sleep. And so we actually opened up the Brain Institute as an adjunct for all the people who didn't struggle with addiction. But yes, we deal a lot with addiction, and we deal a lot with OCD, ADHD-like symptoms. They probably lie on the same spectrum. So when we start looking at these kind of fine distinctions, I think I want to get into some of the reasons why maybe some of the toys are lacking to some extent over, a really well-practiced neurofeedback practitioner. But it would be a good start.
Frank, ask the next couple of questions.
Dr. Jaffe, your institute utilizes this before and after picture of the brain so the patient or the client sees progress. Explain how that picture is developed and how you utilize, once you have that picture, and then get into the devices or these toys, if you will, that you're talking about, that you utilize at your institute to help people.
Sure. So I think one of the things actually that makes Alternatives relatively unique is this QEEG, the quantitative EEG picture that we get for everybody's brain before they start working with us. So we get essentially a comprehensive reading off of 24 electrodes on their brain, on their scalp and face and earlobes that gets us a picture of what does your brain function like at its resting state with no medications on board, no specific activity. We do an eyes open and eyes closed regimen, and then we get a few seconds of data from each of those conditions. And exactly as you pointed out, Frank, what we get to see then is what does a person's brain function like. The important thing there is it's a twofold process, I think. One, nobody's really seen their brain working up to that point, and people come in complaining of ADHD-like symptoms. And I love that you use the word ADHD-like because we don't see the brain, so we don't really know what's going on with it in sort of day-to-day life. And so we assume that we're struggling with ADHD because we have a hard time focusing, let's say. The nice thing
very good. Frank, another question.
Well, Dr. Jaffe, as far as say you have a child, let's say the child is 7-year-old male, and that's predominantly in our country 2-to-1 ratio male versus female,
right.
With the diagnosis of ADHD-like symptoms in this young 7-year-old boy. What would you advise? Like, you do the picture, you kind of pinpoint things, what's going on in the brain, but what kind of device or toy that you describe at your institute? I mean, what are you utilizing to help that child out?
Sure. So we use a few different systems. BioExplorer is the name of one of those systems. The nice thing about the fact that, as you pointed out, Frank, most of the kids who struggle with these diagnoses seem to be boys, is, for better or worse, many of the toys and many of the professional systems, including the ones that we use video games to intervene. And so instead of talk therapy, and there are things like cognitive training and CBT that are helpful for these conditions as well, but instead of those, what our system essentially does is sit a kid in front of a computer screen and has them play a video game without a controller, controlling it completely with their brain. But the nice thing is what we actually get to do in the meantime is we get to, through just conditioning principles, through basic learning principles, teach the brain what sort of activity we would like for it to produce and what we would like for it to turn down. So ADHD, for instance, if we get a classic ADHD case, what we normally see is reduced activity in a brainwave considered called beta. It's a high brainwave, an active brainwave, in the prefrontal cortex. That part of the brain, sometimes people consider that brain the CEO, which I guess it's fitting being on Bloomberg and all. And the CEO is a little bit asleep at the wheel for a kid with ADHD. It's not doing its job reining in brain activity in the prefrontal cortex. And so what we can do through these
I'm sorry, go ahead.
we can actually train up the brain activity. We can actually teach the brain to be more active in the prefrontal cortex, which is so precise and so much more isolated than taking a medication and impacting your entire brain activity.
Let me, real quickly, what is your website, by the way?
AlternativesBrainInstitute.com is the...
Very good. Go ahead with your next question, Frank.
And Dr. Jaffe, as far as, this, what we like to see as far as in the practice of getting rid or helping, especially young children, get back on track, and do you actually have a nutritional protocol that you kind of give parents, as far as what to look out for, diet, et cetera?
We do talk to them quite a bit about environmental influences, and nutrition is one of those. Some kids find out that a gluten allergy or something along those lines, or gluten sensitivity, can contribute. This is a huge problem in the United States in general, but the intake of sugar and what happens to kids when they go through bouts of, essentially sugar binges, and what that does to their energy level, their sleep, and their ability to concentrate. And so sometimes we get kids whose parents believe they have ADHD, and we find out through the brain scan that actually what we're dealing with is something completely separate.
It's almost like a metabolic type of disorder, like reactive hypoglycemia. That's in all the literature now, and a lot of case studies out there with especially young kids where they're just rebounding that reactive hypoglycemia midday, and it's just like an ADHD child, those type of symptoms. So, we appreciate the work you're doing out in California, Dr. Jaffe, and Kevin and I, and our mission is to kind of mobilize these people that are getting alternative care to marry into the traditional medicine that's been going on the last 4 decades, and kind of get and help parents help their kids get back on track.
Got to wrap it up. Great job, gentlemen. Dr. Jaffe and Frank Granett. Frank can be reached at caooy.org. We got some big announcements coming up here in the fall with things we're working on. And then Dr. Jaffe, thanks so much. AlternativeBrainInstitute.com. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you so much for having us.
When we come back, much more for you right here on The Price of Business.